final speaker of chapter 3, as we call it, of ELTOC is Nicky Hockly, and it's always a great pleasure for me because Nicky is somebody that's kind of had a big influence on me and my career, because I've met her in so many different ways, as a colleague, as a peer, as a tutor, been on her courses, worked with her, we've volunteered together. So I'm always pleased to be able to hear what she has to say about technology and education. But if you don't know Nicky is the director of pedagogy at the consultancy, and she is a teacher, educator, consultant, author, plenary speaker, and she trains teachers all over the world, both face-to-face and online. She's written several prize-winning methodology books about new technologies in language teaching. Her most recent books are Focus on Learning Technologies, the ETPedia Technology, and the 50 Essentials for Using Learning Technologies. Her recent interests include blended and online learning and digital literacies. And I'm just finishing your new edition of digital literacies, actually, Nicky. It's sat right next to me there. And she's also written a lot about the use of digital technologies in low resource contexts. And she's here today to talk about what's up with WhatsApp. So, Nicky, the floor is yours. Bring ELTOC to a close.
Thank you, Sean, for that lovely introduction. And we do indeed go back, I think, several decades, you and I. So an absolute pleasure to be here with you all. A big thank you to Oxford University Press for inviting me to give the closing session of ELTOC. I was looking at the chat earlier, incredible range of countries. Wonderful to be here online with you all. And well done to those of you who've managed to attend so many of the sessions. I do hope, we're on the home stretch now, that you'll be sticking with me for the next hour or so. An absolute pleasure. I'm here in Barcelona, by the way, if you're wondering. I live in Spain, where I've been for exactly 35 years. I arrived in Spain 35 years ago yesterday, so celebrating my anniversary, as it were, here. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about WhatsApp. This is the shape of the talk. I would also very much like to leave time for some questions at the end of it all, but I'm going to start by introducing myself and a bit of the background to the project that I'm going to be describing to you, which is about using WhatsApp for live teaching. We'll start then with a very general overview looking at the effects of COVID-19 on education. You're probably familiar with it, and you would have certainly experienced it yourselves wherever you are in the world. Then following up that, we'll look at how I got involved, my company, TCE, and I got involved in training teachers to teach online in the Global South. And I'm going to show you some specific examples of WhatsApp live lessons, because it's very easy to talk about, we did this, we did that, this is how it works. But if you can actually see it in action, it makes it a lot easier to understand, I think. And then finally, we'll be summing up with some lessons learned, and we'll have some time for Q&A. That's the idea for the next hour or so. All right. In terms of an introduction, this is going to serve as a little bit of background, a little bit more information about myself, and a bit of background to the projects that I'll be describing. The block number 1 there is, of course, my name, my job, and I work with the consultancy, or TCE for short, because that's just a lot easier to say. The second block there with the flags on the left, you can probably recognize those flags. If you do, please put the names of the countries, any of them or all 3 of them, in the chat box. I know you all know the one on the top left, which is obviously the UK, correct? And then the one on the right, though, the top right, if you're not familiar with the country, you may be able to recognize my accent, because I am originally from South Africa. Yes, I can see a couple of people have correctly identified that one. Right, beautiful colored, very colorful flag. And then the bottom one, of course, Spain, where I live at the moment. The third block there, a little bit of background about the work that I'm involved in. We do online teacher training at TCE, but we've been getting increasingly involved in consultancy, and specifically in M&E. And M&E stands for monitoring and evaluation. So monitoring and evaluation of large projects, particularly to do with teacher training and especially in the Global South. So we do work with organizations like the British Council, UNESCO, DFID as was, the FCDO, Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, that sort of thing. That's what I want to talk about today. So specifically, I'm going to be drawing on my experience of a couple of very large scale projects carried out in SSA, which is Sub-Saharan Africa, and SA, which is Southern Africa. The names of those projects there are just to show you, that there is a bit of experience in this area. English Connects was a large project involving 16 countries in Sub-Saharan Africa. English by WhatsApp, which is not the project I'm going to be telling you about, actually. This was a project that was carried out in 5 countries in Southern Africa, looking at using chatbots to deliver pre-packaged English language learning materials for primary learners during the COVID pandemic. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the COELT, which is the Certificate of Online English Language Teaching, so an online teacher training course, and Sprint, which is a version of the COELT course that we developed for Nigeria. So you may be thinking to yourself, well, I'm not in Sub-Saharan Africa or in Southern Africa. How is this talk going to be relevant to me? I think it is relevant because whatever our context is, whether we're in a high resource context or a low resource context, our learners will have something like WhatsApp on their phones. It might not be WhatsApp, it's going to depend where you're based. It might be something like, for example, Line in somewhere like Vietnam. It might be WeChat in China. But these are all very similar apps. They're all basically group messaging apps. So what I'm going to be talking to you about is applicable, I think, to whatever context you're in. But you can be the judge of that. See what you think. All right. A little bit more background. Sean mentioned a couple of the books that I've written and co-written, many of them with my co-director Gavin Dudney over the years. You can see there is definitely a common theme here. So digital technologies, and particularly the application of digital technologies to English language teaching, because that's my background. I'm an English language teacher and teacher trainer. The one book that is a bit of an anomaly in that list is the dummies one, the yellow one, Learning English as a Foreign Language for Dummies. That's not specifically about technology. I have to say that one was a lot of fun to write, again with my co-director Gavin Dudney. So just to kind of establish my background here, technology is my thing, and what I want to share with you is what I think is a pretty innovative and interesting and exciting project that we were lucky enough to be involved in Southern Africa. Okay, I'd like to start though by going back a little bit and thinking about the effects of COVID-19 on education. Now, you personally, as I said before, you personally will have experienced the effects. Probably your school, your institution had to start providing online language lessons to students pretty much immediately. Some teachers found themselves from the Friday, teaching a face-to-face class, and then from the Monday, suddenly having to teach online. And if you have any comments about that experience, please do put them into the chat there, because I think it was a real shock for most of us. Those of us who hadn't had much online experience, it was definitely a challenge. But at the same time, a learning opportunity. And I think what COVID-19 has done is that it has shifted our profession along. I think now it's difficult for teachers to say, oh no, it's impossible to teach online. I must say, from a personal perspective as a teacher trainer, I was really impressed with how teachers managed so brilliantly. I think testimony to the kind of dedication that you're showing by coming to all of these 4 blocks of teacher training here online, for example. It was quite extraordinary, actually, how teachers rose to the challenge, often in very difficult circumstances. So we've got Ivana, for example, said there in the chat, she said she found the move both traumatic and motivating. And that's a really, really good description. Many teachers have reported that to me. The negative, because it really was a bit of a shock, but motivating because it was a perhaps unexpected opportunity for professional development. Let's face it, we all know how to teach online now, which maybe wasn't the case before. Thank you very much for sharing your comments there in the chat, by the way, and please do carry on. Yes, it was a challenge and you felt a bit frightened, Judith. Absolutely. Yes. And somebody, Nadia says, I learned stuff that I'll never give up. Exactly. You've increased your skills for sure. We all have. Absolutely. Tiring. Yes. Challenging. Thank you. Thank you for that. All right. What I want to look at, though, specifically is the effect of COVID on LICs and MICs. So LICs are low income countries and MICs are medium income countries. Let's see what the research says now that we've, gone through all of those lockdown periods in most countries. These are probably statistics that you're familiar with. The first point there, by June 2020, 1.1 billion learners were out of school during the lockdown period. This is from UNESCO. It's really quite extraordinary, isn't it? The second point there, existing inequalities in education were exacerbated, particularly between the global north and the global south. And what has also been found is that girls were disproportionately affected, and they still are disproportionately affected by all of the COVID effect on education. So girls particularly, because depending on the context, some were moved, they left school, they were moved into early marriages, or they were moved into the workforce, particularly in low-income situations. I've got a couple of statistics here from UNESCO, for example. I'm just looking at my notes so I get the numbers right. So in low and middle income countries, learning losses due to school closures have left, so up to now, have left 70% of 10-year-olds unable to read or understand a simple text. And that is up from 53% pre-pandemic. Okay, so that's pretty alarming. And then a couple of examples from, I just chose Sub-Saharan Africa because the project that I'm going to describe to you is based in Sub-Saharan Africa, well, in Southern Africa. So, for example, in Ethiopia, primary school children are estimated to have learned between 30 to 40% of the maths they would have learned if it had been a normal school year. And of course, that's obviously not just Ethiopia. This has affected high income, middle income and low income countries. Of course, the amount of learning loss has varied for each context. And in fact, Fatu says here the digital divide is a big factor. Absolutely. Moving online where there's no online is obviously, pretty problematic. And then a last sort of number from the UNICEF report in South Africa. School children now are between 75% and a full school year behind where they should be. Some 400,000 to 500,000 students reportedly dropped out of school altogether between March 2020 and July 2021. And of course, once you have these large numbers of students dropping out, getting them back into the school system is extremely difficult, particularly in low-income countries. So the consequences of COVID and school closures are still very much being felt, and they are in fact on the rise. There's been additional findings, and again, I'm sure this is no surprise. You've probably heard this already. Research has found that the school closures all over the world have impacted children's mental health. And in the low and middle income contexts, the closure of schools often reduced children's access to nutrition in terms of a school meal. So again, that has a knock-on effect. There's basically a lot of evidence showing that there's been an increase in anxiety and depression, especially among children and young people. And these studies have found that girls, adolescents, and those living in rural areas are most likely to experience these problems. One final statistic for you. More than 370 million children globally missed out on school meals during the school closures. So this idea that, nutrition has also suffered that last bullet point there on the slide. Okay, so a bit of a litany of doom, but during that time, of course, there were many positives. Teachers, as you've already shared, increasing your skilling up, students skilling up, and so on and so forth. And it was also an opportunity for a lot of very interesting projects to be put in place. New approaches, new things had to be tried. That's what I'm going to be focusing on. But a bit of background to get us started. Okay, now the recovery period, which we're still in, what are the most effective ways to keep children learning during pandemics? Because people do say we can expect another one along at some point, and also post-pandemic. And again, the research here, the Global Education Evidence Advisory Panel suggests these are two key things that can help children to continue learning. The first is to leverage or to use or to take advantage of existing technologies. So in context where perhaps data is very expensive or there's no internet access, it's not realistic to expect children to be using Zoom, right? It's just not realistic. The technology is not there. The second point here is this idea of encouraging parental engagement, which obviously during the pandemic was important, but research has shown for decades that parental engagement in children's education can be a determining factor towards success. So parental support is absolutely essential. These are the two important things. Okay, so, with the big move online, what were the challenges in low-income countries and middle-income countries? And depending on your context, you most likely experienced some of these. And if you did, please let us know in the chat how that was. The first one is the low digital skills. So, this might be relevant to teachers and also to students. So that move from the Friday to the Monday online, where we suddenly had to use all of these new technologies. Often teachers didn't have the skills, and students as well were left, perhaps a little bit behind. We have the rural and urban digital divide. I think Fatu earlier mentioned the digital divide as an important factor. Absolutely. I mean, we often think of the digital divide as between the global north and the global south, but it is much more than that. We can have a digital divide within the same country, where we have urban areas that are much more connected and then rural areas that are not. We can have this digital divide within the same city, depending on the school. So you may have schools that are more connected, schools that are less connected. We can have this within the same school. So, for example, teachers who are familiar with and confident with technology versus teachers who are not. That's another digital divide. So this was obviously a key area during the pandemic. We had massive learning loss, especially in the rural and deprived areas, because of course everybody went, all right, let's just move online. Well, in some contexts and some areas, this was just not possible. There was no way to move online. So it didn't happen. In some contexts, unfortunately, schools closed and that was it. The kids were out of school and there was nothing. Nothing was provided. In some contexts, the move online was associated with very high data costs. So mobile data is what I'm talking about here, or internet data if you had a laptop. And I'm going to go back to South Africa here because the project I'm going to describe was based in South Africa. So South Africa happens to have the highest mobile data costs in the continent, incredibly high. They also have experience of this thing called load shedding, which if you're not familiar with South Africa, may be a new term to you. But load shedding is essentially a very South African phenomenon. What happens is that the electric company, the national electricity grid, is quite old and needs maintenance, and it can't kind of cope with demand. So every now and again, they have to shut down the whole national grid. They might choose a geographical area or a city. So they might say, okay, this area is going to close tomorrow, no electricity from 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. and you usually don't know that far in advance. But clearly, if you're trying to teach online, this has a massive impact if you're trying to do anything online. Yes, Urshad said right, they're power cuts. Essentially, load shedding is power cuts. But there's a reason behind them. They're scheduled power cuts as opposed to random power cuts. But of course, they do affect online education quite seriously. Romana says you have load shedding in Pakistan as well, right? Okay. So, yeah, thanks for that, Romana. Another factor, of course, lack of devices. So it might be the case that there is one mobile phone per family. And I'm not talking a smartphone. It might be a very simple feature phone, the little, the sort of old-fashioned Nokias where you have a very small screen and then you have the letters and you have to go, if you're trying to send a text message, you need to kind of press A 3 times to get to the letter C. Remember those? That might be the phone that is in the family. Our second last point there, a VLE, virtual learning environment, and or a VC, so video conferencing, is just not realistic for the context. It's especially the case in certain areas in South Africa. In the case of South Africa, for example, generally in sub-Saharan Africa, the projects we've been involved in over the last 4 or 5 years, what is the existing technology? Well, it's WhatsApp on mobile feature phones. So not smartphones, feature phones, because they often do support WhatsApp. These simple phones do support WhatsApp. So clearly, if we're talking about online teaching in this particular context, a low income context or a medium income context, WhatsApp is the thing to use. There isn't really anything else. Okay, just so you get an idea of how widespread WhatsApp is, which of these 3 countries do you think has the highest percentage of internet users on WhatsApp? You can put your answers in the chat there. There's a bit of a delay between me speaking and your answers appearing in the chat for me, so I'll just fill that in quickly by explaining that what we're talking about here is the highest percentage of people who are already using the internet, okay? We're not talking about the highest number of users for WhatsApp. Those are going to be countries with large populations. So which do you think of these 3, just these 3 in Africa, are the highest? Okay, so we have Nigeria, we have a few people thinking South Africa, we have a few people thinking Kenya. Okay, oh, it's difficult to know, isn't it? But here we go. The highest is indeed Kenya. Yeah. But I mean, look how close those 3 are. Kenya has 97% of the percentage of people using the internet. South Africa 96, Nigeria 95. And then we go over to South America, Asia a little bit, back to South America, Turkey, Spain, and Indonesia. And of course, we have different popular messaging apps in different contexts. So as I mentioned, obviously in China, it's WeChat. It's not going to be WhatsApp. Let us know, by the way, in your country, which is the most popular group messaging app. Maybe it's WhatsApp, but maybe it's something else. Let us know. It's good to know about these apps. Okay, these numbers, by the way, are for the Global Web Index report. Okay, so I'm going to talk you through the project that I was involved in, and the idea being you can see how it works and then apply some of the ideas to your own context. So just as a starter, a bit of background, we were contracted by the British Council in South Africa to develop a course called the COELT, which I mentioned earlier, the Certificate in Online English Language Teaching. And the idea was that the South African government and the DBE, Department of Basic Education, they kind of saw what happened with COVID and thought, okay, look, we have got to train teachers to teach online because of, especially schools in rural areas. When school lockdown came, there was just nothing available. The teachers didn't have the skills and nobody really knew what to do. So we ended up developing a course which was for South Africa and then adapted for a later sort of trial period for Nigeria. But essentially the idea is teaching online, teachers learning how to teach online. This is a quick overview of the main training course, which is a 40-hour course. It consists of 6 modules. This is a screenshot here of the certificate. You can see that it's funded by the British Council there. You can see the logo. On the left, the very small, difficult to read logo is the Department of Basic Education in South Africa. So this is the course that we designed based on our own experience of online teaching and all the rest of it, and having worked in sub-Saharan Africa over the last 5 years. It was a very simple, mainly self-study online course. It's still being used, of course. It's based on a Google site. So just to quickly describe some of the choices behind this, we decided to use Google as an easy access site and not a virtual learning environment, because as soon as you put a training course into a virtual learning environment, which requires a login and all the rest of it, you immediately set up a barrier. So it was a freely accessible, easy to access Google site. It was a mobile friendly format. So this is a screenshot from my desktop. But when you look at it on a mobile device, those icons, which are the modules, obviously, it's mobile compatible. You'll have them in a list. We used things in the course that would have a low demand on data because data is so expensive. So instead of pictures, you can see we used very simple icons because it doesn't take up much data to download an icon versus downloading a glossy, beautiful photograph. In the course itself, we used audio rather than video, again, because of you use less data to download or to listen to audio than to watch a video. And we used H5P, which is an automated kind of tool, let's say, which allows you to do simple things like drag and drop and multiple choice and so on. In the materials themselves, we had for South Africa and again for Nigeria, we had teaching materials that are used by the teachers in those two contexts. And we also had local accents. So local South African accents in the South African version, local Nigerian accents in the Nigerian version, of course. For each module, we had downloadable PDFs. So essentially the module content was there. And what you could do was you could download the PDF and then you could have it on your phone or on your laptop or whatever, and you could work offline. This is extremely important. There's been some research carried out in South Africa, for example, that found that teachers work in this way. People will go to Starbucks or go to a hotel or find somewhere, maybe it's a school, which has Wi-Fi, connect to the Wi-Fi, and then download stuff and then watch it later at home, maybe where they don't have an internet connection. I'm sure this is the case in many of your contexts as well, where data is expensive. Within the course itself, what we did was we designed lessons around using WhatsApp for live language lessons. In other words, during school lockdown, kids were not going to class, right? So let's imagine you as a teacher had an English language class from 3 p.m. to 3:45 p.m. Now, because Zoom and all of that stuff was really not possible in many of these contexts, we designed lessons that could be delivered via WhatsApp in real time, so from 3 to 3:45. And that's what I'm going to show you basically how that all worked. We used WhatsApp as well for the main communication channel for the teachers that we were training, and we used a cascade training model. I'll just quickly describe how that works if you're not familiar with the idea. The way that worked was basically we had our TCE trainers, that's our company, TCE, the consultancy. We trained South African and Nigerian separately, but South African lead trainers in POELT, so how to run it as a trainer. They then worked with South African primary and secondary school teachers of English, science, and maths. It wasn't just English language lessons. It was also science and maths lessons. And then those teachers were using the WhatsApp live lessons with South African learners. So that's essentially how a cascade model works. And we had targets of thousands, obviously, of teachers and learners over, a 2-year period. Okay. What I really want to focus on, though, is how the WhatsApp live lessons actually worked. You'll see that there's a reference there to Mohlabane and Zomer 2020. Our design of the WhatsApp live lessons were based on a project that was run between MIT, which is the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in the USA, with a local NGO in South Africa called Grassroot. And what that project did in about 2019, 2020 was developed a way of training community organizers through using WhatsApp. So a kind of a proof of concept of what we wanted to do already existed, although in a completely different field. But they were trying to use WhatsApp in a kind of, let's call it a synchronous and an asynchronous form, because as we've established, WhatsApp is really the technology that is appropriate for the context. Okay, so how did this all work? Well, I'm going to give you an example of a WhatsApp live lesson. I'm going to show you how it worked. Background, this is a lesson that is for grade 5 primary school students. It's a science lesson which is offered in English, and you can see that the topic is a healthy environment. And on the right hand side, this image here basically shows the typical kind of textbook outcomes, the language outcomes, and so on. But because we were offering this to teachers as well, these are the teaching skills that the teachers needed to develop: how to take a register, how to ask students to share a photo in a WhatsApp group, and so on and so forth. Now, the South African teachers, if we remember our cascade model, the South African teachers were running these live WhatsApp lessons with students. A lesson typically lasted 45 minutes and was with 30, 35, 40 students. Now, you know what a WhatsApp group chat is like. It's a bit like our chat here on the right. It's very fast, and it's a lot of overlapping turns. It's difficult to follow some of the time. So rather than me recording a real lesson with 35 learners and one teacher, which is just extremely difficult to follow, and also you need to watch the whole 35-minute lesson, what we did for the purposes of this conference was a group of us, so myself and some of our TCE trainers got together, and we did a little demo lesson, which is much faster and much shorter. And it means that I can show you how these lessons work over a 4-minute period, rather than making you watch a 45-minute lesson, which would be an insane thing to do in a conference. Okay, so the context is that we're going to look at, from the beginning, a science lesson, this science lesson, how this lesson content is offered live through WhatsApp. There are, I think there's 5 or 6 of us, as I recall, in the lesson. We have the teacher. You'll see that her name appears as teacher. And then we have the students. So the students in this case are our trainers, as I described. So you'll see I'm a student. My contributions are in green as a typical student. And then we have our demo students are called Lindsay, Carol, Bev, and I think that might be it. There might be somebody else. But just so you know who these people are, but we're showing you how the lesson works. All right. So the video is just starting. This is the beginning of the class. The teacher, we can run the video, Sean. The teacher is just saying to everybody, hey, we're starting in an hour. So the first thing the teacher does is, in the WhatsApp group, send a reminder to the students. Okay, so we're doing this in our cascade model as trainers to teachers. So the teacher's basically doing a little reminder there, using GIFs, which turned out to be extremely popular. Lindsay is one of the students, if you like, in the lesson. And there we have the lesson launching. Hello, everybody. Are you ready? Thumbs up for yes. Me in green, by the way. All right, I'll let you read that as we go through. Teacher's going to check some classroom rules. The teacher leaves an audio with some instructions and an image. And you can see she's set the task under the image. Notice how she manages the classroom. Okay, everybody, go. And there we have the students contributing. And there we have the teacher giving feedback, praising the students. Now the teacher takes the register, which obviously in a class of 30 has to be done. She sets the topic, healthy environment. Okay, she sets some instructions. She sets an audio with text. We have everybody answering. Okay, again, you can see the classroom management. Don't post your answer till I say go. She gives the instructions in audio and text. Then she says go. Okay, again, instructions in audio, classroom management, response from the students, bit of feedback. Okay. Again, you can see the classroom management. It's quite carefully managed when you have groups of 30 in real time. This is how it needs to be done. Now she sets up 2 groups within the class, okay? So she checks the students know which group they're in. And this way she can manage a large class by having only 15 people responding at the same time instead of 30. So she's saying, okay, here's a question for group tigers, and here's a question for group elephants. I'll let you just read some of that. Okay, so students are responding. See how she's bringing them in. She's still using the same classroom management techniques. She's giving some individual feedback. She's giving kind of a summary of the task. Again, you can see how the group management works here. Okay, so now we have the negatives. I mean, you'll notice, of course, that we are doing this as a demo, right? So we're fabulous students. Our English is absolutely wonderful. Okay, notice how the teacher is using a lot of audio instructions, but also with text. So she's going through the lesson content, summarizing, praising. Okay, she's using images as well. Again, she does the audio summary and then provides it in text as well. Okay, she gives some audio feedback. Okay, all right. So just to recapitulate, this is obviously this is a 4-minute video, and it's just showing you how the beginning of a 45-minute lesson works. Remember that these are not real students. Carrie, Bev, myself, Carol. We're not South African students. It's us. We're doing this as a demo so that you can see how this works. Because can you imagine if we had 30 students answering every single one of these things? It would just take us a very long time to watch the video. All right, so this is a demo of how it works just for clarity. There's a couple of things to keep in mind here. You know, the classroom management is important. Using groups with large groups, so the elephants group, the tigers group, that kind of thing can also help with dealing with the amount of response. But it's an interesting, and I think, as far as I know, a unique approach to real-time teaching in WhatsApp for primary and secondary. The teachers did indeed use WhatsApp on desktops, Winnie, and they had stuff pre-prepared, which they pasted in, because otherwise the pace of the lesson slows down considerably. Excellent question. All right, I'm going to move on. Thanks, Sean. Let me just move on. Some of the lessons that we learned from doing this, we did, of course, we didn't do just one lesson, we did many lessons, which we trialed and demoed, and then trialed and demoed with the trainers, who trialed and demoed it with the teachers, who then also trialed it with their own students. What we did find was that additional key digital skills training was needed by teachers. So Winnie, for example, asked in the chat, she said, did the teachers use WhatsApp desktop? Well, they did, but they didn't know how to use WhatsApp desktop when we started this. In fact, some of the teachers didn't know how to copy and paste. So that, us working in this context, was a real eye-opener. Don't just assume that teachers have what we might consider to be basic digital skills, like copying and pasting. So we had to develop a separate training thing to develop some very, very basic digital skills. The technology, even using WhatsApp, which is a low data demand app, it still incurs data costs. So what happens? Does the project cover this, right? Can you expect your students to be paying for data? Video conferencing clearly was just not appropriate, we found, in the context that with load shedding and data and so on, it just wasn't working, but WhatsApp most definitely was. We used WhatsApp in RT, real time, and we also used it in not quite real time, both with teachers and teachers with students. In the lessons themselves, we made sure there was a combination of text, pictures, and voice notes, but no video because of data demands again. WhatsApp was also used for additional purposes. We showed in the course itself, we developed skills for teachers to understand how to use WhatsApp for homework and also for liaising with parents, which is the not quite real-time use as opposed to the live lesson use. Okay. Where are we? This is the original learning material. So this is the typical thing that you might find in a textbook. And then this sort of thing can be set for homework for students after the live lesson. But you can see how this is exactly the same content that has already been worked on during the lesson itself. So this kind of follow-up of the live lesson. This is an example of a reflective task for the teachers. So remember that we were offering the course as well using WhatsApp. So go back to that cascade model if you get confused. But it's an asynchronous reflective task for teachers. Sean, I think we have a video for this one. Do we? No, we don't. No, not yet. Not yet. These are just some of the learning tasks that we use in a slightly different mode with the teachers themselves. And then here we have an example of the lead trainers reflecting on the learning that they had been doing in the COELT course, but in a synchronous format. And again, there's a very, very quick video to show how that worked. Thanks, Sean. Okay, so here basically the teachers are saying things that they learned in real time. You can see 1709, the timestamp, it's all happening in real time. They're having a reflection session. Teachers are having a reflection session in WhatsApp itself. And these are things that they learned through the whole COELT course. So you can see how they were very aware of some of the skills that they learned. For example, copying and pasting text. We have one of the teachers saying that they'd learned about that. Okay, thanks, Sean. We'll go back to the slides. Just a little bit of feedback from the lead trainers. Remember our cascade model? It was our trainers at the top, then the lead trainers who were training teachers who were working with students. Okay. So these are the words of the South African lead trainers. And here are a couple more comments. And the comment on the left there is talking about lag, of course, and the fact that you have these overlapping turns in any kind of text chat with a large group. So a certain amount of chaos with a group of 30 is absolutely inevitable and is actually quite fun. But if you have very clear classroom management structures in place, it's absolutely doable. And there we go. On the right-hand side is this issue around connectivity and data and accessibility and so on. So, while the idea of offering live lessons in WhatsApp is, I think, a helpful and clearly viable solution for these kinds of low resource contexts, it's not like it's the perfect thing and nothing else is going to be good. It's something that can work and it can fill the need basically that we found during COVID and during lockdown. Okay, I did reference a couple of reports from UNICEF and the World Global Report and so on. If you would like those references, I'd be happy to share them with you. Please just drop me an email. And I hope we have a good 10, 12 minutes left for questions and answers, because I would be very interested in your contexts.
That's a good job. We have 10 to 12 minutes because you have a lot of questions. So if you look at the Q&A, you might need to scroll because there are quite a few. So
I see. Yeah. Okay. All right. So I'm going to start from the top. I'm not sure whether the participants can see the Q&A questions. Sean,
I'll put them up. If you say the name, I'll as you read them.
Okay. The first one from
Jim.
Okay. The first one from Jim F. Yeah. Oh, thank you. Wow, that was fast. You obviously had that pre-prepared.
We did say at the top, so I kind of knew where you were going from.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah. No, great. And I mean, Jim's question is perfect because we're talking about sub-Saharan Africa. And this particular project that I was describing was designed for exactly these issues that were being experienced in sub-Saharan Africa. Yeah, basically, we also had load shedding in South Africa. So working your way around that is an issue. So, example, we'd have the teachers all ready to do a live lesson in WhatsApp with their learners, let's say at 4 p.m., from 4 to 4:45 p.m. And then there was load shedding. So they would have to try and reschedule those kinds of things. I think that the WhatsApp is perhaps at the moment, the best technology suited to the issues that you have with internet connections and so on. If you want to do a live online lesson, it's certainly a better option than Zoom. You can forget about Zoom with unstable internet connections and expensive data. There's nothing that I know of that is less data greedy, let's say, than WhatsApp. Of course, you could use email and so on. You could use asynchronous means, but we're talking here about synchronous means. If it's absolutely impossible to do synchronous, real-time classes, then you just have to go asynchronous. That's all there is to it. And that might be using WhatsApp in an asynchronous model so that you don't need to have constant connections. But thank you, Jim, because that is absolutely, one of the issues that we were trying to address. Okay. The online training, by the way, a couple of people have asked about that. This is a course that's offered by the British Council and the Department of Basic Education to South African teachers. So it's not publicly available. Jenny has a good question. Jenny T. She says, how do you assess learners using WhatsApp? Yeah, good question. Well, in fact, in this case, the WhatsApp lessons were simply replacing the face-to-face in the classroom or in-person lessons. They just covered the same ground. So there was still homework that the students could do asynchronously. So in their books, their little exercise books, that can form part of assessment. It depends on the school and so on. And they still had to do the usual assessment tasks. So it's not that we're looking at assessment through WhatsApp, we're just looking at delivering the live lessons through WhatsApp. The assessment procedures still stayed in place. And in South Africa, I believe that during school lockdowns, there were no exams or anything, but the exams took place when schools went back. And they had several lockdowns. Schools would go back for a month and then lock down again for 2 weeks. So the assessment procedures for primary and secondary school remained the same. They just got delayed or made later. Okay, I'm just going to have a look again for another question and go down. Hada has a question. She says, which ages do you think this would be suitable for? So which ages would the WhatsApp live lessons be suitable for? Great question, Hada, thank you. In our case, the lessons are designed for primary school students and for secondary school students. So we're talking about school here, primary and secondary, standard general education, maths, science, and English. You could, I suppose, do it with older learners, but the way that our lessons are designed, you'll notice that they are very staged. So they are, I think, more suitable for lower levels of proficiency. If you've got a class of advanced language learners, I'm not sure you would do it in quite the same way, a class of advanced adults. But there are definitely many ways to use WhatsApp with adults in not quite real time and real time. not necessarily the live lesson model. Okay, let me just make sure I cover a few people here. Okay, Stefania R, she says, great, but how do you cope with the slow pace that this approach with so many students tends to involve? Stefania, that's an interesting question because actually it's not slow. It is unbelievably fast. What you saw was a recording of a screen. I used a recording device on my phone to record a lesson we'd already done so that I could walk you through some of the stages. But when you're actually in the lesson, the pace is frenetic. It's mad. You have 30 people in there posting bum, 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 bum the whole time. You have to turn your WhatsApp thing off so it doesn't ting annoyingly constantly. But the pace is extraordinary. It's engaging for the students because there's stuff happening all the time, and for the teacher who's using WhatsApp for desktop, you need to have your chunks of text ready to paste over, because otherwise, you'll be sitting there typing slowly, and your students will be doing things you won't even know what's going on. So the pace is actually extremely fast and extremely engaging. The feedback that we've had is exactly that the pace was kind of, wow. It was like getting into a really fast car, your hair's blowing back, and that's the 45 minutes of the lesson. And then there's a question just under that from Isa. She says, this must require a lot of preparation. There you go, you can read it yourself. Right. Yes, again, a good question here. So you don't find the audios, you create audio. So I know I couldn't play the audio for you in the lesson. We didn't have time. But those little audio recordings are the teacher giving the instructions, and they tend to be very short. So the teacher has pre-prepared the text bit, and they can pre-prepare the audio, or most of our teachers like to just do it themselves on the spot. But they know what they're going to say. They have a text there that they just record and read out, because it's almost easier to do that than remember which is your audio and then paste it across. So audio tends to be done live, but it's essentially the same instructions that then appear in text, so that learners have both modes. They have the audio informational instructions and the text informational and instructions, both of them. Thanks for that, Isa. I'm just going to look for some more questions. Okay, there's an interesting question just underneath that one, Sean, from Nawal. She says, can we apply this? There we go. Can we apply these kinds of activities with all second language learners who make loads of mistakes in grammar and spelling? Now, that's an interesting question, because I think these WhatsApp lessons are very effective with low-level students. Making mistakes with grammar and spelling is, in fact, part of language learning. I'm sure, Nawal, that you're a very proficient speaker, but if you think back to when you started learning English or another language, when you're a beginner, you do make mistakes. And in fact, research shows that making these mistakes, it's part of learning. You cannot learn a language without making mistakes. It's a bit like life. Making those mistakes is how you learn. It's how you learn. It's absolutely essential. So I sort of think, well, great, the more mistakes, the better. You run your lesson. When you're finished, all those grammar and spelling mistakes are there, lovely, all that evidence of exactly the problems your learners are having. You go back through the lesson, you make a list of those anonymously. You don't say, John made this mistake, Jane made this mistake. No, you make a list of the common mistakes. The common mistakes your learners make. And then in the next lesson, you can get your learners to review it, or for homework, you send them a list of the mistakes and you say, okay, I want you to correct these. And then in the next lesson, we're going to review them. So in fact, these kinds of mistakes in grammar and spelling and so on are a wonderful opportunity for learning. Okay, let's see. Sorry, I just need to read these questions. There's some wonderful questions here.
But there are so many, aren't there? So yeah, take your time.
Yeah. Okay, right. Nisba has a nice kind of logistics type question. Nisba, she says, in teaching on WhatsApp, I'll let you read that.
That was testing me. You jumped down the list.
I'm trying to jump down the list.
I know you were.
They're really great. I'm not getting very far. I'm answering most of the questions. Yes, this is a really good question. It's a kind of a logistics question, isn't it? Yeah. What we tend to find is that learners just join back in because the lessons are in fact quite. They're a series, if you'll recall the video that I showed you, it tends to be an instruction, which is audio and text, and then learners do stuff. And then there's an instruction with audio and text, and then the learners do stuff, and then there's some feedback and summary and so on. And the learners just join straight back into where they are. They certainly don't have time to go back through stuff further on, but that can be done later after the class. So they just jump back in and sort of cope as they can. But you're right. This is a good question as well, I think, because there is, as I said before, there is some chaos involved. I mean, it's a group chat in real time. It's a little chaotic, but that's also where the kind of the fun and the engagement for the students come from, and the stress for the teacher. It can be quite demanding for the teacher. Okay. Chris F has a question. He says, worksheets on PDFs. He's referring actually to the COELT course. So Chris is referring back to that COELT course, which was on Google Sites, and the live lessons are just a part of the course. Yes. Yes, Chris, I mean, what they do is they can do this on their own on paper. Then they're not students. Remember that this is a course. The COELT course is offered to teachers. It's a teacher training course. And absolutely, we don't expect people to print. Totally not. They can download the PDFs, which have got the basic information of a self-study course in PDF. So it has an answer key at the end. And as you would do on a computer screen where you do your drag and drop and your multiple choice and so on, using H5P, so it's an interactive activity, in the PDF, you have, your sentences and then your little box of words, and you can, you just do it in your head. We're talking about teachers here. And there's a key at the end so that you can check. We certainly don't expect to be correcting the teacher's work here in the teacher training course. Good question, though. All right, I'm going to try and scroll down a little bit.
Yeah, you've got about 3 or 4 minutes as well.
Do you want Sean? Do you have a couple ready that you?
I know, because there are so many. I didn't know they're going various directions, so I think it's better for you. I'm happy to jump when you pick a name, unless there's anything particular. There's a number of things about WhatsApp itself. I think I quite like the question about the disadvantages because you've spoken about all the positives.
Oh yeah, pop that on the screen for me. I haven't seen that one. I might have gone past it. Yes. Okay. So disadvantages. Yes. Thank you for that. Definitely, I think some of in the lessons learned slide that we had before, which I don't have in front of me, but it's things like, and a couple of you have already mentioned this actually, how to handle a large group of 30 students at the same time with a sort of little bit of chaos, teachers needing to be prepared for this kind of live approach. Teachers need to practice. So the first time, because we trialed all of these lessons ourselves, we wrote the lessons, and the first time that I did a WhatsApp group, I needed to practice with a small group of people first, just to kind of get the hang of it. So teachers do need to practice, and the training course, in fact, addresses that itself. So that's another thing. Another disadvantage is that teachers do need some basic digital skills in place. For example, copying and pasting. That is another disadvantage. So they may need previous training. Another one is connectivity. I think was it Jim who said that before? Tim said that about Mauritania, load shedding. So there are definitely disadvantages, as with any use of technology in a low-income context or a middle-income context, or low-resource context or middle-resource context. Is there anything else that you?
Well, if the ones that I'm not sure if you've answered the ones or not. If you don't mind me setting you up, then there's the one from D, which I think is quite interesting. About you've talked about the number of people in the group, and you've talked about the kind of the advantage disadvantage of the ongoing, the speed of the chat as such. But I mean, did you find there was is there too big a number? Is that and how would you? Indeed's question is particularly about how might you handle people that aren't actively participating.
Yes. Yeah, good question. The question about class size. I mean, ideally, the smaller the better. But of course, teachers don't have a choice here. So in this particular context, we were talking between 30 and 40 students per class, because that's the number of students in the classes. It'd be great if you had 5, but that's not how it works. But to get everybody to participate, what we found was most effective is the grouping of students. So do you remember in the lesson I showed you, there was the tigers group and there was the elephants group. So if you have a group of 30 and you put 15 students into tigers and 15 students into elephants, and then you nominate a group. So you set your question and you say, okay, I only want the tigers to respond. Now we had 30 students. We can easily have 6 groups here, which would be 5 students per group. So if we have 6 groups, elephants, tigers, lions, rhinos, and whatever, whales, then when I nominate my group, I say, go lions, then there's only 5 students answering. And I can see them. I can definitely monitor 5 students. So it's really about the logistics and the classroom management to ensure that the students do participate. The group idea is great, but it's not easy to start like that. It's easier to do a whole class lesson and then in a subsequent lesson start to set up the group idea. Students get it very quickly though. They know what group they're in.
Thanks. I'm gonna be selfish and ask a question myself, but somebody did ask it. I've seen a lot at the moment with educators moving to Telegram for it. If you were doing the project again, would you use Telegram or is WhatsApp better with it?
We use WhatsApp because it's the most commonly used group messaging app in South Africa.
Okay.
Telegram is nowhere near it. So that's the rationale. I think you need to use what's available. Telegram's very similar. The main difference is that you can use Telegram with much larger groups. I think you can have up to 2,000 people. Not that you would ever want to do
with 2,000 people.
With 2,000 people. That'd be insane. So we do use Telegram on our projects in Sub-Saharan Africa, but we use it for teacher development. So for communities of practice,
right,
where you might have 300 teachers together in a group. But with students, I would ask them which apps they use. And if you have students who are using a feature phone, and there might only be one feature phone in the family, often one of the parents, what is the app that is on the feature phone?
Absolutely.
In South Africa, it's WhatsApp. I mean, we did the research into this before we started doing this. We made sure that we used an app that people do use. But you could use Telegram or something.
Yeah, I was asking it because I'd just seen a number of talks about Telegram recently, but also there are people in the chat box and some people have asked us questions, you were talking about specific context of South Africa and that being the app that you really needed to use. But I think people need to maybe take from that this course was specific to that region. And the discussion they're having is, well, what if my students can't use WhatsApp? But then, yes, if you're in Asia, you might use Line or WeChat or something like that. I think that's where they're coming from with it. Nicky, we're pretty much at time actually. So
okay,
want to wrap up?
Yes, I do. Okay, so I just really want to say thank you to all of you for your wonderful contributions in the chat. It was really interesting to read about your experiences and wonderful questions. I'm so sorry I didn't have time to answer them. I wanted to answer every single one of them. Thank you for your time. Well done for attending the last session and getting all the way to the end of it at ELTOC. And a big thank you as well to you, Sean, for the moderation.
No worries. Always nice to listen to you.
So,
thank you very much, Nicky, and really insightful talk. The talks today have just been so amazing. I've learned something every talk that I've been in, which is great. As a moderator, I'm here for a purpose, but it's great to listen. And thanks so much for that. And I hope people got really good ideas about how, I think that obviously Nicky's presenting you with what they did in a context, but there's so much that could be taken out of that and applied to your teaching if you use WhatsApp or messaging apps as part of your teaching. Thank you so much, Nicky. Always great. I look forward to catching up with you again at some point in the future. Take care. Enjoy the rest of your Saturday.